His name is Tyler. Tyler Miller. He's been in the software game for over 25 years, first as a developer, and then as an engineering manager, and finally onto leadership positions. He's worked at Google, Trimble, and Prezi before moving to Catawiki, where he's now Chief Product and Technology Officer. He's worked on a diverse set of products with teams across many locations and cultures, and in doing so, he's picked up a few tricks of the trade. He's here to share a few of those with us. The title of his talk is A Deceptively Simple Technique to Set Your Teams Up for Improved and Enduring Velocity. Please put your hands together for Tyler Miller.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I think 9:15 in the morning on day 2, they're putting the stretch in stretch conference, right? I will try and keep it lively and entertaining to get you up. And like almost every talk at an engineering leadership conference, I'm going to talk about how we can improve the velocity of our teams. And let's get started by asking, there we go, a pretty simple question, but one that's pretty darn important if you're an engineering leader. If you were to ask your customers or your business stakeholders to imagine your tech team, your tech department, as a herd of animals, what would it be? Would it be a snuggle of sloths? Interesting fact, there's no fully accepted collective noun for sloths because they are generally loners. They're achingly slow, they kind of do their own thing. Or would they think of your team as a herd of elephants? Very powerful, but a little bit lumbering. Hard to change direction? Or perhaps would they think about you as a pack of wolves? Wolves are very strategic, they're collaborative with each other, they're coordinated, they're quite fast. I suspect all of us would love to be considered the pack of wolves with our tech departments, right? Agile, quick, capable, coordinated. And I'm going to make an assumption that most of you here do a lot of things with your tech departments to make sure that you can be that wolf pack. Any self-respecting engineering leader probably has a bookshelf that looks something like what's over here on the right. Virtual or real books. And you know, you get a lot of advice from these things. How to hire the best talent. How to make sure your roles and responsibilities on the teams are very clear. Working in small cross-functional teams. Doing great prioritization and planning before you get started on implementation. Having really good discovery and design phases. And rituals like grooming and retros and things like that that keep everybody moving in sync. I think these are items that there's a lot of literature on, and I would say they're pretty well at this point understood and reasonably well practiced across the industry. So I'm going to make the assumption in this talk that everybody's already doing a lot of these things, at least reasonably well, okay? Yet despite that fact, most tech departments by their customers or their business stakeholders are still considered more in the elephant or the sloth bit of velocity, right? And this is especially true as you scale. As you have more teams, teams of teams, and you have more services, it gets harder and harder to maintain velocity. So why is that? Why is it a problem or that we slow down despite doing all those great practices we just talked about it, right? Well, easy enough to find out. Just ask your team. And in fact, a few years back, I was CTO of a local company here, Prezi, and we did just this. We asked the teams, right? What's slowing you down? We did all those good practices we just mentioned, small cross-functional teams, even teams of teams, you know, good agile practices, things like that. So we asked them, you know, we just went from team to team and said, hey, what are the things that slow you down, right? And these were the kinds of answers we got. Too many meetings. Oh, in order to do feature X, you know, I'm going to have to, you know, refactor systems A, B, and C. And in order to do that, I got to coordinate with 3 different teams, stuff like that. Personnel issues, people leaving the team saying perhaps they don't want to deal with our legacy code or the tech stack if we're behind the times. This we got a lot. We're trying to do too many things at once, right? And it's a very natural thing to try and do too many things at once because, of course, if you haven't fully made it as a business or a product, there's an urgency there, right? Sometimes it's issues with the tool chain that are making folks inefficient. My builds take 20 minutes every time or something like that, or to new up a dev environment, it takes a long time. This is a classic one. Many of us have platform teams or DevOps teams, sometimes people call them, that are out there creating a better tool chain, yet your vertically oriented product teams don't seem to have time to actually adopt the improved tool chains that the platform team is providing. A lot of times there's new developments in the industry, frameworks, languages, whatever, tool chain tools, that if we could adopt, we could move a lot faster. You hear that a lot. And then there's the kind of overhead issue of things breaking, right? If we've constantly interrupted, I'm working on this feature, but I'm constantly interrupted because such and such is breaking, right? So I suspect this is pretty kind of common feedback that engineering leaders get. And I'd submit that every one of these is a symptom of these 2 diseases. I wasn't sure whether it was too early to show big pictures of coronaviruses as on screen or not. But the 2 diseases here are context switching, robbing people of time, and tech debt, okay? So let's get into those a little bit. Let's define them so that we make sure that we understand the problem that we're trying to solve here, okay? Now, I don't think I have to define context switching too much to folks. This is something we all deal with all the time. There's a few statements here at the bottom that you'll never hear an engineer say, right? I love context switching. I'm really good at it. Constant context switching helps me get more done, said no engineer ever, right? And really no person ever. It's hard. That's why it's a problem, okay? This is actually a study from a book back in the 90s even on software engineers and context switching. And it shows across the x-axis the number of projects that an engineer is working on at any one time. And on the y-axis is the percentage of time that's actually going into productive work on the projects they're working on, right? The darker blue is the time lost to context switching. And you can see as you divide your attention, you lose more and more. You incur more and more overhead from context switching. I think you've seen a lot probably in the literature and everything that when you force somebody who's working on a cognitively demanding task to context switch, often it's a good 20, 25 minutes before they can switch back in and be productive on what they were doing before, right? So there's a lot of overhead involved if you're forcing people to do context switching, okay? What about tech debt? This is a great cartoon illustrating what non-technical people often think about, in terms of understanding of velocity. And there's your house over there. It's falling to pieces. And they're just simply wondering, why can't I just put in a window, right? I'm going to use a really broad definition of tech debt and just say that it's anything in your tech stack that reduces your team's velocity in producing end user benefiting product, right? Another way to say that is any kind of engineering work that doesn't directly benefit the user. Or simply, it's overhead, right? Nobody pays us to change to a new build tool that's more efficient, right? Ultimately, your tech department is there to produce value for your end customers, right? So that's tech debt. And I want you to keep in mind that tech debt is going to accrue no matter what you do. It is not just cruft building up in your own code that causes extra overhead, but it's also changes that happen in any of your dependencies or even the industry at large, right? Technology is still evolving quite rapidly. New tools and techniques and libraries and frameworks and stuff are coming up all the time. So tech debt you should consider inevitable. It is not something you can avoid, it is something that you can manage. And part of the nature of these things is that these two things make each other worse. If your team is context switching all the time and incurring all that overhead, they're likely to be building up tech debt at a more rapid pace. And when you do that, things break more often, more interruptions, and end up doing more context switching. So it's not a good spiral, right? So that's our problem. I went to school for 4 years to be able to do important equations like this. Context switching plus tech debt equals velocity that's sloth-like, right? So sluggish velocity is the visible symptom to your stakeholders, to your customers, of not successfully treating these diseases, right? So great. I think we defined a problem that we probably all know about already. Let's discuss, before we get into solutions, let's discuss a couple things about the nature of these problems. You as engineering leaders probably inherently understand that these things can make a huge difference in the velocity of your team. But here's the thing, your non-technical stakeholders probably do not, right? If we go back a few slides and look at that cartoon, they're probably this guy, right? They're probably saying, I don't know, just put in a window. Why does it take so long, right? So that's something very important, and it's something that you have to consider in the solution that you try to help improve your velocity. Another interesting thing is that there's surprisingly little good literature about treating these diseases. There is some good literature about treating it at an individual level. I don't know if many of you have read this book, Deep Work, by Cal Newport. Great book. And lots of good common sense techniques for arranging your day and how you go about things to avoid context switching and distraction and that sort of thing. Okay, but there's actually very little good literature about how do you apply these kinds of concepts at scale, not just at a single engineering, agile team or something like that, but teams of teams and teams of teams of teams, right? So that's part of what I'm going to talk about today here is how do you apply that at scale? And let's define kind of the flip side of tech debt, what I call tech foundations work. This is the work you do to address tech debt. Anything that would improve the efficiency or flexibility of your teams in addressing end user benefiting capabilities, right? Another way to think about tech foundation work is that it's an investment, right? I said earlier that the business and our customers don't really pay us to do tech debt kind of work. It is a necessary overhead, right? So the work that we do in there is an investment, and that's probably the way that your business stakeholders are going to be thinking about it, right? And so what is the kind of work that we do for this? This could be as simple as bumping dependencies, switching to a new framework, maybe adopting standardized tooling from that your platform team has created, refactoring within some of your services, something like automating your dev environment, setup and teardown, right? If that's fast and easy, people are more portable between teams, less time waiting for that to happen, deployment, stuff like that. It is not fixing product bugs in the way I'm defining it here, okay? And this kind of work has a nature to it that we have to recognize. This kind of work tends to be more aligned with guilds, using the sort of Spotify terminology, like back-end engineering, front-end engineering, mobile development, QA infrastructure, stuff like that. Then it is aligned with individual cross-functional product teams, right? And it's work that it's very hard to make significant progress on as in sort of piecemeal, a couple hours here and there. It's also work that tends to be pretty monolithic and is hard for just a single individual to make significant progress by themselves. And for teaming, it's awfully hard for individuals to effectively team on work like this if they're not available to work on it together at the same time. They can make progress, handing things off here and there, and everybody does a couple hours here and there. But boy, it's awfully slow and ineffective. Right? So that's Tech Foundations work. So now we get to the meat of the talk. What can we do about this? Before anybody in the room even bothers to suggest it, stop everything and fix the foundations is not the answer. First off, your CFO, no, can't do that. And it's also, every engineer would love to do this, right? This is the engineer's dream. Stop everything and fix the foundations, right? Okay, but it's actually a pretty risky approach. A lot of companies that do try that never emerge from it. And this is my biggest issue with it, is it's not sustainable. It's a sort of firefighting kind of approach to addressing these issues. So I consider that to be the last resort approach to fixing this. So I'm going to prescribe 3 simple techniques or steps that you can do that I consider to be kind of common sense things that help improve the velocity and do so in an enduring way, right? A sustainable way, okay? And these are things that, you know, I came to over many years, not through some grand, you know, theory, but rather through mostly stepping in it and making mistakes and then trying something different. And these emerged from our teams, often suggested from the teams themselves, that actually ended up really working for us. So step 1, secure an explicit agreement with your business stakeholders, CEO, CPO, etc., on the percent of your engineering capacity that should go into managing tech foundations, okay? Managing tech debt, okay? So think of your total capacity, engineering capacity, as a big bucket. And have the discussion and arrive at an explicit, and explicit is important, agreement on the percentage that you're going to target that goes into the tech foundations, okay? And I'll talk about how to make that argument here in a second. Why would you do this? Okay? First, has anybody ever on a task-by-task basis had the fun of negotiating with your, say, product counterpart? Shall we do some tech foundation task, or shall we do a product task? Right? Happens all the time. Okay? Who's going to win? The product task is always going to win. Don't kid yourself, right? It is more directly connected to producing revenue for your company. It will always win. So accept that fact. However, if you're talking to your CPO, your CEO, that sort of thing, it is actually reasonable for them to understand that if you don't schedule maintenance for your equipment's going to schedule it for you, right? So they understand that, okay? So you can talk and have a negotiation. Now, I put up 80% and 20%. That is what I do with my teams. The situation of your particular company could mean that this could be different. So I'm not being prescriptive about the amounts here. This is what works for me and my teams, but it could easily be, 25%, it could be 15%, something like that. One thing's for sure, it's probably a lot less than 50%, right? You're not going to secure an agreement that it's going to be more. Also, why to do this? Save time. Negotiating product work versus tech foundation work on a task-by-task basis is time-consuming. Who wants to have that debate every single grooming, right? It's also not fun. Save your sanity. If you're an engineering leader and you're debating this on a task-by-task basis, you're gonna be bald by like age 25 doing that. Hopefully. Hopefully no women are going bald there, but you already invest this. This is, I think, the most powerful argument that you can make with your stakeholders, why to do this, and why to make it explicit. You have to invest some in your tech debt just to keep the lights on, right? And you probably already do this, but you probably don't, do it in a somewhat unorganized way. So you want to be very clear that if we make this explicit in the future steps that we'll get into a second, that we'll make what we get out of this 20% that we're already investing more, a higher return on investment, okay? this step alone is not sufficient to solving our problem of context switching and tech debt, okay? If you secure this 20%, or whatever the percentage is, and then you just turn around to your teams and say, great guys, spend 20% of your team on tech foundations work. What's gonna happen, right? Some teams are probably gonna do this work, I don't know, they may do it 2 days at the end of every sprint, if they say are working in 2-week sprints. Some other team is gonna say, hey, we do it at the beginning of the sprint. Some say maybe they're gonna mix it in alongside all the product work. Still other teams will say, you know, oh, okay, we'll just do a maintenance sprint or something whenever they feel they need it. And the thing is this isn't effective because they're not thinking as about the whole nature of tech foundation works and how it works across a scaled tech department, right? It doesn't sufficiently address context switching. When you do it in little small pieces, like a couple days at the end of a sprint or mixed in, it's really easy for it to get squeezed out again by those very same issues of product work working over tech foundations work. And it doesn't really, like I said, recognize the fundamental nature of tech foundations work that we discussed, the fact that it works in guilds. Basically, your teams are cats, right? And you're not doing a good enough job at this point as an engineering leader of herding those cats, right? Okay, so that leads us to step 2. And that's to defrag and align your cadence across the whole of the tech department to enable both deep product work and cross-team tech foundations work, okay? Now, this illustrates the way my team does it, and again, you may choose different paths, but what's really important here, we work Scrum, 2-week sprints style, but however you work, what's important is that you place a tech foundation sprint or increment or whatever you want to call it across the whole organization together. Okay, so you set up a cadence, in our case with the 80-20 split between product work and tech foundations work, we do 2 sprints of product work, and then the whole tech department together is working on tech foundations work for a week. Okay? And why does it work? Okay, first, this common sense, you're aligning the schedules. We said that this kind of work is actually more aligned with guilds, right? Well, you probably only have a couple, 2-3 back-end engineers in each cross-functional team. If they want to work together as a guild across teams, it's awfully hard to do that if they're not available to work on tech foundation work at the same time together. So you're just aligning their schedules, okay? And when you do that, you actually start getting these guilds working together and they're cross-pollinating information with each other. They're not on the same agile team. And does anybody here, have you dealt with silos where team A really doesn't talk and work and even understand team B? This is a wonderful offset of doing this, or outcome of doing this, is that you get people, back-end engineer on team A may have the same sort of passion for improvement in the tech stack that a back-end engineer on team C has. And they get together and they work on this, they cross-pollinate, they help each other learn. So it's great. Another aspect of this is momentum, right? The way I have it arranged here, we spend a week working on tech foundation work, okay? Has anybody heard the old joke about hackathons, right? There was, at one time there's a meme, 48-hour hackathon, spend 40 hours setting up my dev environment. when you do tech foundation work in little increments, like say 2 days at the end of a sprint or something, you get that effect. The context switching effect into and out of these things is there. So if you arrange it where you do a full week together, it's enough to get material stuff done, real improvements in your stack, without too much frequent context switching. So I call that the Goldilocks rule, right? You're limiting context switching. You're not going in the middle of every week back and forth between each task, one being a tech foundation work, one being project A, project B, that sort of thing. But you're also getting the other end of it, is that you're trying to keep people from being on a forever grind. I mean, 4 weeks, let's say you're working on a pretty good size initiative. As an engineer on Team C here, 4 weeks grinding away on that initiative is actually a grind, right? And having this, tech foundation week every 5th week, I found is a nice kind of not too much switching, but just enough to keep people fresh, right? I've talked to some other engineering leaders that do this at kind of a different, slightly different, same concept, but slightly different cadence. What's right for your team, could be different. Okay, and then last is benefit of this is growth. These become mini sprints where the leaders of each of your guilds, back end, front end, iOS, Android, QA, or that sort of thing, have a chance to essentially act as the product manager for that guild, right? It is very important that you actually plan, groom, and prioritize, limit work in progress, stuff like that for that guild. And so it's a great growth opportunity for them to do that. Obviously growth and learning and development is important to retention, so it's a nice effect of this. So that's step 2 of 3. Why is this not sufficient for treating the diseases we talked about? Okay. We have addressed on kind of a macro scale, a cadence scale, context switching between product work and tech foundations work. But we haven't yet addressed sort of the day-to-day context switching that adds a lot of overhead to every individual. Has anybody ever seen this phenomenon? You go to schedule a meeting with folks or something like that, and you pop up this, and you see these big blocks of focus time. And then you see lots of other little blocks of meetings and that sort of thing. And A, you can't schedule the meeting that needs to be had to coordinate work. And B, it's awfully hard to blame this person, that person, that person for protecting themselves by blocking out focus time on their calendar, right? That's an individual reaction to too much context switching, okay? But doesn't it make sense if we were to all sort of do the focus time at, say, I don't know, the same time of day or the same day of the week, right? The mental modalities of what I would call coordination work and deep cognitive work are really different. And there's a price to pay when you switch contextually between those things, right? So we need to avoid that as much as possible. So that is step 3. Defrag and align your weekly calendar in the team to enable both deep work and coordination work. Now you can choose, again, I'm going to show what we do, but you can choose to do this in any way that works for your team, okay? And I suggest starting small, okay? And what I do is there's just 2 days of the week that are reserved for particular types of work. So we have, because we like alliteration, move and sync Mondays, okay? And that is a day that we reserve for a lot of the coordination work that goes on, right? This could be as simple as basic agile rituals, groomings, retrospectives, things like that, okay? Some planning work up ahead, like that, okay? And that's a particular mental modality, and it makes sense to stack those things if you've got several of those things to do. So we try and do those on Monday. And interestingly, a lot of us, I think, are working in hybrid modes these days. I think that's best to do on a day that your team is in the office, if you do that, right? And then pick another day of the week. We do Deep Work Wednesdays, where literally meetings are banned, right? It's reserved for deep cognitive work. This is when I was at Google in the early 2000s, there was no meeting Thursday, right? This is a common technique, I think, used in the industry, right? And that's essentially that calendar of everybody having focus time on there. That's just lining that up. You're just saying, hey, we get it. We understand it. Why everybody needs to reserve focus time, okay? But let's just do a little bit of alignment with our calendars, and we can be much more efficient as a team. So the summary here is secure an explicit agreement on the percent of capacity that should go into tech foundations. I use 80 and 20, okay, 20 for the tech foundations. But again, your business situation could dictate something different. Defrag and align the cadence to enable both deep product work and cross-team collaborative work, right? Tech foundations work. And then defrag and align the weekly calendar just a little, right? Don't be overbearing on this, right? But defrag it into enabling both that kind of coordination work that needs to get done, legitimate stuff, and then also the deep cognitive work. Okay? So, how has this gone? Like I said, this is stuff that emerged organically more through trial and error than any, academic theory, right? I've done this now at 2 different companies, Prezi here in Budapest and Catawiki, both scale-ups, both with tech departments that were 100 to 150 people, right? So a decent scale to them. At both companies, I got really clear positive signals out of this thing, okay? Now, this is a room full of engineering leaders. I'm not going to insult any of you on saying that we got a 25.6% increase in total velocity, right? I think we all know some of the pitfalls of measuring velocity and really finite quantitative ways. But it was very clear, it was material, and it stayed that way when we moved to this kind of cadence at both companies. 2, and not explicitly a goal, but something that was very welcome, is the rate of engineer attrition went down at both of these companies implemented this, right? Engineers absolutely know and respect and care about how you invest in the tool chain, right? They care about their efficiency. If you're actually treating that and treating that effectively, great. They're going to be much more pleased and stick around. And here's the thing about these 3 techniques. They don't cost anything. They're just common sense, mostly just alignment of schedules. So my results have been really positive with this, almost to my surprise. And when I do this talk, the most common worry I get from people, the first question I tend to get from people is, yeah, but I'll never be able to get, my CEO or my CPO to agree to this, okay? And you are here at Stretch, an engineering leadership conference. Presumably you are a engineering manager, director, VP, maybe CTO, right? You're a leader. If you believe in these techniques, then doing that work of convincing, whether it's your stakeholders or your team itself, to give this a try is precisely what leadership looks like, right? It's not necessarily easy because any technique or methodology, or philosophy, people love to debate these things like religion, right? So it's not necessarily easy to change to these things, but this is what leadership looks like in my mind from an engineering leadership standpoint. So you have to be bold to turn your team into that wolf pack that you want to be, the agile, fast, coordinated team. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tyler, for your talk. The questions have been rolling in, and they're still available, folks, if you want to jump in on Slido. Let's take the first one. What are your thoughts on a distinction between Tech Foundation's work and a more tech improvement / exploration?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jason. I actually take a very broad definition of Tech Foundation's work. So to me, that would be inclusive. Now, as a leader, I do think you've got to be a little bit judicious on how much of that kind of exploration work goes on. I think everybody loves to do that. I know I do. But you know, so you got to control it a little bit. But I would consider it as you know, within the definition of Tech Foundation work.
Okay. Our next one, how can we track effectively the percentages of our bucket?
I would answer that question with a question. Why do you want to? All right. So first off, the schedule and the cadence itself helps with that, right? You're literally separating that work. It's a separate backlog. So if you want to count cards that you're doing that are Tech Foundation cards in Jira or something like that versus product work cards, you can do that. And I wouldn't get any more sophisticated than counting cards, right? Tracking duration of cards and that sort of stuff starts to get into more work than the value it provides. You know, I would actually let the cadence or the calendar do it for you. And I'm not sure it's that important, to, at least not to have a super accurate tracking or accounting of this.
Okay. I'm nodding and smiling, but I have no idea what you're saying, but I know the audience does, and that's what's important. If the teams in an organization work on separate sub-projects that work together in the realized product, is there a point to align the Tech Foundation work? What do you make of that?
Yeah, I'm assuming working on sub-projects of bigger Tech Foundation work is the question here. And you know, the point is during one of those Tech Foundation weeks, and you just have to plan it ahead of time, right? So let's say a big project has components A, B, and C. Different groups are working on that. Okay, maybe they're working on that for a couple of those weeks, and then you know, the third week is, you know, planned out for that to come together.
Okay,
would be my best advice.
All right. David asks, what if a tech debt initiative is not ready in 1 week? Should it be continued after 4 weeks?
Yeah, so wouldn't it be wonderful if you could just work on something until it's done all the time? Well, that's the sort of approach of stop everything and fix the foundations, right? And it's just not likely to be accepted or practical in your business, right? Unless you're, you know, some cash machine already. And so, yeah, you end up shelving it. And my advice there is that, treat these tech foundation weeks just like a product sprint with your leaders in any of the guilds planning them. And so, break your big thing up into smaller things that fit into the week and then assemble them after a few of these tech foundation weeks. It sure beats not doing them little piecemeal, slowly and not making real progress across. So,
okay, thank you. How do you coordinate between different roles in a tech foundation week? For example, what do project managers or designers do during that week?
Yeah, great question, and not something I addressed in this talk. We actually, at Catawiki, have really ended up starting to take advantage of these weeks with the PMs and the designers and run design sprints and stuff like that, where they can do essentially the same thing that the engineers are doing, which is on a day-to-day during their product sprint, they're working within their cross-functional agile team, which means that PMA and PMB don't get to work together and learn from each other. So they've started taking these weeks and doing design sprints or deeper discovery work together in a more collaborative way, and that helps them, explore more. So we're getting some better product design out of this.
Okay. The next one, by Anonymous, how does Tech Foundation Week help in guilds creation if there are different teams with different stacks?
Well, if there are different teams and different stacks, I would argue that it's probably not, the same guild, right?
Okay.
But I suspect, let's just take the most common thing, that across most of your teams, if you're working in an agile manner and if you have a microservice architecture, I hope, for your sake, that you have some standardization and unification in the stack for your services, right? Which means you're going to get a fair amount of, say, those back-end engineers that can work together in a guild during these Tech Foundation weeks. As you get to smaller guilds, front-end work, mobile work, that sort of thing, this is something that you have to manage and organize.
Okay. The next question is, how did you implement it? I think you know what they mean by it, yeah?
Yeah.
One shot, step by step. How can a mid-level manager get started?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I mentioned earlier that these aren't academic ideas that I came up with or anything like that. They emerged organically. And for instance, I had one single team. We had already secured at Prezi this agreement that we'd spend 20% of our time on Tech Foundation work, but every team was doing it differently. And one team came and said, hey, we'd like to try this cadence of doing 2 sprints and then a whole week of Tech Foundation week. We think we'll get more done. I said, sure, try it, right? And that's really my answer to this question is, sure, try it, right? And then grow it if it works, right? And so they did it, and like we went through, maybe a quarter of them working in that style, and I was like, wow, holy cow, they're like ripping through this Tech Foundation work. So I, talked to the engineering manager, what's going right? And then we expanded it to their team of teams, okay? That was working on that area of the product. So it was now 3 teams that were working in that style. And sure enough, the results were good for the 3 of them. And then we expanded it to the whole of the tech department. So it was more incremental, not one shot.
Okay. Anonymous has another question. How do you scale the teams for Tech Foundation Week? Can 20 people work together?
Yeah. Before I answer that, on that last question, the other thing I want to talk about in terms of one shot versus incremental. I think I'd also add to that is that none of this is irreversible. So say to your teams, let's try this. Let's do it this way for, 6 months. If it doesn't work, we'll throw it out and try something else. And that really disarms people on it. Scaling teams for Tech Foundation Week. Yeah, obviously, not every Tech Foundation project shards to the number of engineers in the guild, just like not every product initiative requires everybody on the cross-functional team. So it's much the same process, right? You do want to limit the work in progress. You don't want to have, say for back-end guild, you don't want them doing 15 different Tech Foundation projects at once, but you also want to break it up, and maybe you have 2 or 3 going on at the same time, and with, I don't know, 5 engineers on each.
Time for a few more questions. Are you okay?
I'm fine if you have time.
All right, they're loving this Q&A. If you have multiple teams, do you need to sync the focus times of teams, or different teams can have different focus times, assuming the teams interact?
No, synchronize it. I'm assuming what they mean by, I'm guessing this is a question on that step 3, focus times, what I call deep work Wednesdays and stuff like that. I think it works better if it's just synchronized across the whole of the tech department, and it works for several reasons. You work with more than just the tech department. You coordinate with marketing and sales and whatever other departments, central functions, and that sort of thing. And it works best if everybody just knows that, hey, the tech department on day X, they don't do meetings. Right? And so if you want to keep that invasiveness of meetings from encroaching on your deep work day, I think it's better to have kind of one. So it's more of it's almost like a marketing thing within your own company. You could do it on different days, but even within tech, teams work together, and so I think it's better if you have kind of more of hey, we do most of our coordination work on a particular day, and then we do deep work day on, in our case, Wednesdays.
Okay. Let's see the next one. How to organize this with teams working in Kanban or Kanban?
Yep. It's much the same, right? Kanban, you're not necessarily working in increments, but you're still working in time, right? So you just can work for 4 weeks Kanban style on product work, and then you switch and do the Tech Foundation work. Now, this does bring up a key implementation detail of this, is that you want the backlogs for your product work and your Tech Foundation work to be separate, right? We already said that Tech Foundation work is more aligned with guilds, so have a backlog or a project in Jira, if you use that, that is, I don't know, back-end guild or front-end guild or something like that. And so it's separate. So you're working on your cross-functional Kanban team for 4 weeks against that Kanban board, right? And then you stop. People work with their guilds for a Tech Foundation week. Then you go back.
Okay. Okay, in this next question, it looks like Team B is getting lazy on us here. How can you deal with the tech department if multiple teams depend on each other? Example, Team A puts 20%, but Team B puts 0%.
Fire Team B. You think I'm joking. I'm not joking. You are the engineering leader, presumably, in this case. If they're not doing the job that is necessary to, for you as a whole company, to be successful. I mean, no customers care if Team A is the blue ribbon team and Team B is bad at a company. They care about your product, right? And they have to work together to do this. So if they're not doing that, then this is a performance management problem, not a methodology problem.
Okay, gotcha. What if the sprints between the teams do not run in parallel, so that I can plan the technical tasks without a switch context?
I think the question is, if on the calendar, the sprints between the teams aren't aligned. Align them. You're the leader. Ask, this is part of the change, right? And this is the part that's a little uncomfortable too as a leader, right? Because it tends to fly. The prevailing sort of philosophy is autonomy, 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 right?
Right.
Okay. And why are you doing autonomy? Well, people like autonomy. Okay, that's great. But they also don't like working with legacy junk and not, having a bad tool chains and things like this. So this is a case where actually I think you make people happier by, enforcing some change in the team. So get their sprints aligned.
Okay. How do you measure the cost benefit to optimize the percentage amount of tech debt for my team?
Yeah. I would love to say that there's a objective way to do this. There's not. And you could spend your entire engineering leadership career attempting to create some beautiful objective framework that does this, and I think that would be a little bit foolish because it's more subjective.
Okay.
So it is a negotiation, and you're an engineering leader. Usually engineering leaders have been successful software engineers and stepped up through some of the management or other forms of leadership processes, and you develop an internal feeling for this. Now watch out, because we are all engineers. Left to our own devices, we would love to do nothing more than work 100% on tech foundation work, right? That's not practical. You need to view it from a company standpoint, right? So, I'm afraid I have to say it's more subjective than objective here. And I think going too deep into trying to measure that, you'd end up spending a lot of time, and I don't think you'd end up with a lot clearer outcome.
Okay.
Yeah.
You've done about 10 questions now. They've really picked your brain.
Yeah.
Do you have time for one more?
One more, sure.
Okay. Would you like to choose? We have the difference between exceeding 20% and optimal duration.
Let me take the third one here.
Okay. So what would be the optimal duration?
Isn't it exceeding 20%?
Oh, that one.
Yeah. So isn't it exceeding 20% by having that deep work day? And I could see where the confusion came up. I should have been more clear. That's deep work. It doesn't say it's deep tech foundation work, right? So when you're doing a product sprint, that day is deep work on the product initiatives that you're doing, right? Which, remember, are just as tough and cognitively burdening as anything else, right? And if it happens to be a tech foundation work, that's a deep work day on the tech foundation work, right? Tech foundation work, it still works a lot like a product sprint in that it does have to be planned and coordinated, right? And so you got to do that form of work, and then you also, maybe need to be really uninterrupted deep work, on the actual implementation stuff. So it applies to both, and it doesn't change the 80-20 split.
Okay. Thank you very much. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you like tea?
Coffee.
Coffee? Hey, Christmas is only 100 days away.
I like
some beautiful tea. That's tea for you. And we also have a piece of art for you. Look at that. Let's show that to the folks at home and the audience. An artist's rendering.
Thank you.
Please give a big round of applause for Tyler Miller.